Hi guys, Andrea Mills here. I'm coming to you from my bathroom today because I was having a very hard time finding a quiet spot in this noisy house, and it's too windy to work outside because the wind makes all sorts of noise on the camera, so I'm going to hide out here in the bathroom, and hopefully nobody needs to go potty while I'm in here. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the difference between natural consequences and punishment. So I thought that I would start first talking about the word disciple or discipline, which I'm probably not going to share anything new with you, but I thought it'd be a good refresher to think about. When the Bible talks about disciplining your children, the same word is the word for disciple, like Jesus' 12 disciples. And discipling or disciplining someone is the act of teaching them. The disciple is the learner, so they're learning something. So while punishment has an appropriate place in discipline, discipline itself does not mean punishment. It means teaching. So I feel like that's a good thing that we need to remember, because a lot of times when it comes to applying natural consequences, we kind of get the idea that it has to be painful or harsh for it to be effective. So I want to hopefully today dispel that myth and give you some practical examples of what I mean by natural consequences. So the reason that this even came up the other day was one of my friends, we were talking, the group of us, about difficulties that we're having with our children and kind of running ideas by each other, and one of them asked me about schoolwork, and when my kids don't get their schoolwork done, what is the consequence for that? And so my response was, well, that he didn't get his schoolwork done. So how I view it is that the child who spends their whole day doing school, they miss that whole day of doing other things that they would have liked to have done. So the consequence doesn't need to be attached something new to that. The consequence was that they gave up all of their free time. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't mention to him what the consequence was, because I feel like sometimes little kids miss the whole point. And so I will say to him, it's really sad that you spent your whole day messing around at the table and didn't get your schoolwork done, and then you had to spend the whole day doing that and not doing any of the fun things that you wanted to do. So I do think telling them or pointing out what the consequence was is a good idea, but that doesn't mean that I need to come up with some new form of punishment to go on top of it, like taking away a privilege or something like that. So I thought I would give a few adult examples of natural consequences to kind of get a point of what a natural consequence is, and then we'll talk about what a punishment in those cases would have been also. So the first one I have is an example would be, what if you were flying somewhere and your plane was leaving at, say, 10 in the morning, and it takes X amount of hours to get ready, this long to get to the airport, this long to get through the security, and all those kinds of things. And so you need to leave your house by a certain amount of time, and you need to get up at a certain time. And that day comes, and you forget to set your alarm clock. And of course you get up late, and as fast as you're rushing, when it comes down to it, you end up missing your flight. So, obviously, the natural consequence of getting up late that morning was missing the flight. Another example would be, this was one that happens to me all the time, that I do really great planning a menu and all that for a while, but then something happens and life kind of falls apart, and I haven't planned a menu, and 5 o'clock comes and I have no plan whatsoever for dinner, and then it just like, all the pressure, everybody's hungry, what am I going to cook, I can't make a decision. And so the natural consequence of my lack of planning is that pressure that comes from not having a plan and having to figure something out and feeling tired and cranky and all that kind of stuff. Another example is paying bills late. So if I were to, say, not pay my phone bill, and the natural consequence of that is if I owe money and I don't pay that money, then the phone company is going to turn my phone off. So the natural consequence is the lack of services because I did not pay for those services. And then another one I was thinking of was being obnoxious. If I had an obnoxious personality that people didn't like, the natural consequence of that would be that I would not have any friends. So, or at least I wouldn't have any who wanted to be around me very much. So as adults, we all live with natural consequences every day. Now, a punishment would be something to me that is applied on top of or externally to that natural consequence. So it would be like if they fined you for missing your flight, or if you could get thrown in jail for being an obnoxious friend. Those kinds of things, they're kind of a punishment that's added onto it. Of course, with children, it might be, you know, taking away privilege that was not a natural outcome of their behavior, but something that we add to the punishment. It might be taking away allowances or something like that. You know, when I think of these things, I ponder all day about the stuff I want to talk about in these videos, and then I start talking and I feel like it all just goes out the window, and I feel like I'm just rattling on. And I think the reason is because when I'm sitting in a room with my friends, I'm getting feedback constantly, and so their faces are telling me if this is making sense, and they're saying, well, what about this? What about that? And it makes it so much easier. So I hope that these videos are helpful and that it's just not me rattling on and making nonsense statements to you all. So thank you for going ahead and listening in spite of whether or not this is coming across the way that I hope that it does. And I don't know, I just feel so flat right now. So I'm going to carry on though. Okay, so for some examples of things that our kids do that I would apply natural consequences to. So I've already given the example of not finishing schoolwork. And so I have a further example of that situation, which was the same son who has a hard time still getting his schoolwork done in a speedy fashion. He was messing around one morning and, you know, not getting things done. And then around lunchtime, when all the rest of the boys were pretty much done for the day, he was still not done, and my dad came over. And my dad was going to be working out in his yard, and he has a pond, and he wanted the boys to come over and help him dig holes in the pond because he wanted to make it deeper, which to me does not sound fun, but if you're a boy, you love digging holes. And so they were all really excited that they got to go to Papa's house. And so my son that had not finished his schoolwork, the natural consequence was that he didn't get to go. And I think I've kind of talked about this last time, in that heart attitude that it's not my job to make him be responsible. It's my job to teach him and to love him through it. And so I sincerely felt sorry for him that he didn't get to go. It was really sad, and I don't want to make it worse for him by being like, well, dummy, you should have got your work done. So I try, sometimes my sarcasm gets to me, but I try to keep to sincerely, I guess, feel empathy for him, because it was sad that he didn't get to go and he had to stay home when everybody else got to go do something fun. And I didn't need to be harsh or mean for him to learn the lesson. Then it was actually the day that us moms were having this conversation about it, that they were all at our house, and he had not, again, finished his schoolwork before everyone came. And when it was all done and everyone was going to go home, one of our friends asked if the boys could come over, or some of the kids could come to their house to play. And he wasn't done with his schoolwork. And so I'm like, you know, all of them could go, but he didn't get to because he wasn't done. Now, he only had a couple pages left, and in the time it took this family to get ready to go, he hustled and got them finished up, and he got them done, and he got to go on, and I was happy for him to get to go. I wasn't going to say, nope, sorry. I sincerely want his life to be a happy, productive life, and I don't know how to emphasize that enough, that the attitude of our hearts cannot be one of manipulation or of happiness at their failures or of a stinginess of heart. I'm not sure how to say it, but there can be such that hardness of heart that it makes the person who's allowing, I guess, the natural consequences seem like, you know, Scrooge or something, rather than a loving parent who's sincerely sorry that you made a bad choice. one of the things that came up that day too was about a child who, forgets something even though they've been told. So let's say you're going somewhere and they forget their jacket or they forget their water bottle, and you tell them to bring it and then they still forget it. So this mom was wondering about what kind of a punishment they should have or a consequence. Then I'm like, well, the consequence is if they don't have water when you go away from home, or they don't have their jacket and they have to deal with it being cold, and maybe they don't even need it. Maybe it turns out that there was no need for either of those things and it's not that big of a deal. So you might say something like, I'm really glad I have my jacket even though I didn't need it, kind of a thing. Or I'm glad I had water when I needed it, and I wouldn't withhold water. If somebody wanted to share with them, I wouldn't say, no, sorry, you can't have someone else's water. But I might say something like, I'm sorry that you have to share with somebody else, because, we want to be mature, and mature people have enough to give. We don't just take for ourselves. And so when grown-ups don't rely on other people to take care of them and remember stuff for them. So, next time, hopefully you'll remember to bring your own water, and maybe you'll be the one that gets to share with somebody instead of the one who has to take from somebody. Another one that came up that day was the child who misses the breakfast, because maybe mom says breakfast is at 8 o'clock and we're gonna have pancakes and all that, and one of the kids is not getting up in time to participate in that breakfast because they're being slow or sleeping in or whatever. So what do you do? And how I would say it, the natural consequence is that they just don't get any of the pancakes. Breakfast time came and went and you missed it. That doesn't mean that I would say nothing, you can't have any food. I would say go have an apple or a banana or something like that, but we're not going to make a new mess in the kitchen because that part of the day is over. And if you want to participate in that part of the day, you have to be ready. I'm not about starving kids, but if you want to have the good stuff, you got to get up in time. Then there is the child who just does annoying things all the time, makes annoying sounds, says annoying things, and irritates people. And of course, hopefully we're having this conversation about what kind of behaviors make you a good friend. But it's also good, I think, to point out, just like I said before, that we actually sometimes or frequently need to gently point out the natural consequence to our actions. And in that case, the natural consequence of the kid who's annoying or always tattling and things like that is that people aren't going to want to be your friend. And maybe it's going to take time to bear that out before you see it, but just reminding them that this is not how friends are. And if you want to have friends, you have to be a friendly person. You can't be somebody who's constantly irritating people and tattling on every little thing that they do if you want them to like you, because eventually the day is going to come where they think, you know what, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. So how we have dealt with our own kids on the issue of bad words, saying bad words, we have never told our kids that they cannot say bad words. We just talk about the fact that people who do use bad words are viewed a certain way. So if you hear somebody using the F word or the S word or whatever, you have a certain idea in your mind about that person and what kind of a person they are. And so we tell them, you're free to use whatever kind of language you would like, but you must be aware that what you say, other people are now getting a picture of what you kind of a person you are, or making a judgment about what kind of a person you are. And if that's the kind of person you want people to think you are, then you're free to use those kinds of words. But if it's not the kind of person you want people to think you are, you maybe should be careful about how you speak. And, of course, I think they've all chosen, at least in my own hearing, they've all chosen to use good language. I have no idea. Behind my back, who knows what goes on. But again, I don't really have control. So my attempts to force them not to use bad language, I always think that I could try to force them or make a big deal out of it, but ultimately I can't control it. So I would rather just keep the weight on their own shoulders about what they choose to do with their life. Okay, here's one for little ones. The running off or not staying with you when you're out and about. There is the one way I've seen of, constantly keeping an eye on your kids and chasing after them every time they step away from you, kind of a thing. But I feel like that is kind of pointless because you're not letting the natural consequences happen. And of course, we don't want to actually lose our children, so we don't want to truly have the natural consequence happen in that sense. But I have always felt like letting myself get out of sight where I can maybe still see them, but they don't realize where I'm at, is always a good reinforcement for the fact that it's their job to follow me and pay attention to where I am at. It is not my job to follow them. They need to be paying attention to mom. And so I maybe will step around or just get where they can't see me, and then when they have that panicky moment, step back and say, oh, there you are, you know, kind of a thing. And it's like, oh, that's really scary when you don't pay attention to where mom's at and you can't find her. I'm glad that you're okay, kind of a thing. And so we'll just I kind of try to reinforce that you should have been paying attention. This thing that happened was because you weren't doing the right thing, not because mom wasn't doing the right thing. Because I really want to put for all of these things, the natural consequences is putting the weight of a child's actions on their own shoulders and making them see the connection between their behavior and what happens to them in life, and thinking in that adult terms that what happens to me in my life is a result of my own actions. And punishments, again, are appropriate at times, but when they're contrived, it doesn't have the same effect, I don't think. So let's talk about the not cooking, not making a plan for dinner. So what if my husband decided to keep a little chart or something where every day that I didn't have dinner prepared on time, he was going to give me a check mark, and if I earn 3 check marks, then he's going to take away one of my privileges. You know, he's going to take away my computer or my books I like to read. So something like that. While that might be effective in getting me to plan ahead for dinner, it would have a very detrimental effect, I'm sure you can imagine, on my feelings toward my husband. And I think that's where punishments can, if they're used too frequently, can become bad over time, because it's creating the rift is becoming between a parent and child, or between the two people, rather than between the child and their own actions. So we start to view the person who's punishing us as the source of our pain, rather than our own actions as the source of our pain. And that's why I feel like we shouldn't spend too much time trying to think up punishments for behaviors, but just point out the natural punishment that they already have, so that they start to make that connection. I certainly wouldn't want a husband who punished me. It wouldn't go well over a long period of time. And I think that with our kids, when we can spend the bulk of our parenting, which is the easier way is to just let the consequences happen. Don't rescue them from it, but don't add to it. Just point out what's happening in their life and how it connects with their behavior, that we maintain that relationship of student and teacher instead of adversaries. And we don't want to have an adversarial relationship with them. And especially as they get older, you know, our oldest is 14, and I've seen that how we have maintained a very good relationship with him, even though we've had some rough times where we've had to deal with issues. Overall, we really enjoy being around each other, and he listens to us, and we give him a lot of freedom, and he is a very mature, pleasant young man to be around. And I feel like so much harm comes when we think of discipline as punishment, and instead of thinking of it as that teaching, and just teaching them and helping them understand how the world works, and teaching them how their own actions are going to dictate how their life goes, not because someone's doing something to them and they're a victim, but because they're responsible. They're responsible for themselves and what they do. Well, we are going to continue talking on this topic of parenting and raising children, or raising adults, as I want to say it. So if you want to continue having this conversation with me, then I hope that you will subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have questions or comments about this, I would love it if you would leave them below. And if you even have a different way of seeing things or disagree, I would love it if you would make a video of your own sharing with the rest of us what your thoughts and ideas are, because I always feel like more information and more points of view is better than less. So please, share with all of us your own ideas on this topic, and we will see you again soon.